welcome to my channel. My name is Adam W. Rodriguez, and I'm your host here at the Art of AWR. This particular video, we're going to be doing a book review for The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. I'm pretty excited to talk about this. I read this bad boy maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I've let it mull over in my head for a while. I've had a roller coaster of thoughts about it, and I'm super excited to get to it. But before I begin, if you want to see more videos about book reviews, creativity, art in general, subscribe to my channel. Maybe like this video and then hit that bell so that you get new notifications every time a new episode drops. Awesome. Now, The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. To be perfectly honest, when I first finished this book, I put it right down and said, I think I just read a bunch of military propaganda. And then I was a little disgusted. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, no, it's not military propaganda. It's kind of anti-war. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe it's anti-soldier. Maybe it's pro-soldier. And then I realized it's just a very honest and complicated piece of literature that wasn't intended to steer your mind in any particular direction. It was just very human, and that's the thing about humans. They're complicated. So I kind of grew more and more to appreciate this book. In fact, in many ways, the best part of this book was the aftermath and the effect that it had on my mind. I'd like to start by talking about the history, though. There were several different publication dates that I saw throughout my research, which I'm not going to say was very extensive, but I tend to read a few articles before I do these book reviews. 1895 was the general consensus. There were some earlier dates, and I think that was other versions of the book that were like released in magazines and stuff like that. Smaller page counts. I think the 1895 publication is the one that we see today. So 1895 was when it was published. And then 5 years later, Stephen Crane would pass away. He dies of tuberculosis in 1900. He was only 28 years old, meaning he was only 23 when he published this book. It was hailed as one of the most accurate depictions of the war zone in the Civil War. And a lot of his critics found it interesting that Stephen Crane himself had never seen war prior to this. He was actually born 6 years after the Civil War had already ended. It's hypothesized that he spent a lot of time in like the town square listening to old veterans and reading different accounts of the actual war itself, which were pretty popular in those days. And yet hailed very much so as one of the most accurate depictions of the Civil War by many of the critics in America, and it was really well received in England as well. Ernest Hemingway said that this was one of the best war novels ever written. Stephen Crane, in several of the articles that I read, many of the critics compared him to Émile Zola, who was this French writer who was well known for his accurate depictions of historical settings. And I can see why they compared him to Zola, because his descriptions of the camps and the skirmishes and the fighting were all super accurate, or at least as far as many of the critics of the book were concerned. I felt like I was there, and that is a special power that Stephen Crane has. Talking about his special powers, let's go ahead and move into writing style of the book itself. This thing read kind of like an epic poem. This man's ability with figurative language is superb. I've watched a few other videos about Stephen Crane, and most of his admirers say that he is a great poet. He was a way better poet than he was a novelist even. And I can totally see why they say that. The turns of phrase, the metaphors, the personifications that he throws in this book are so gripping and for example, he has probably the best description of a man being shot in the face that I've ever read. And it's written so beautifully that I am both horrified and I almost like came to tears at just the sheer beauty of how it was written. It's wonderful stuff. Stephen Crane deserves a lot of credit. I'm really sad that he passed away as early as he did. I would have loved to have seen where his writing went in his later years. His personification of war was often described as the red animal. What was the other one? It was the the blood-swollen god. I mean, come on! What great metaphors. I mean, it's so good, and I found myself being really enthralled. I remember saying in one of my videos that I would burn through this in like a week. I burned through this bad boy in 2 days. Like, I picked it up once, had trouble putting it down, then I picked it up again and then burned through it. And yeah, it's only 160 pages, but I'm a pretty slow reader, you guys. Plus I had homework to do for class, so I was just like burning through homework just so I could get back to this bad boy. This book is told through a third-person kind of limited perspective. And what I mean by limited is that it's told from the perspective of a singular character. Stephen Crane refers to him as the youth. You don't actually know what the guy's name is until several chapters in. His name is Henry Fleming. He's a young farm boy who is disenchanted with his life in rural America. He sort of feels his ambition dwindling away, so he decides to join the Union Army. And he's in these camps, and he's struggling with his ideas of glory and courage. And when he finally gets into his first battle, he struggles with his sense of self-preservation. And I don't want to give away what goes down, but I will talk about another metaphor, and that's the actual title of the book, The Red Badge of Courage. A red badge of courage is sort of a openly visible badge that proves your courage, in that it's a wound that you receive from battle. You know what I mean? So showing up with one arm or one eye or just a giant gouge in your flesh, that is your badge of courage. It's how you prove your mettle to everyone around you. It's really dark, you know, that he wishes for it. He wants to be maimed so that he could show everyone how courageous he is. And that is heavy stuff, really. And it's also really human, and the darkness of it he struggles with, and you got to really just appreciate how human the character is. He does eventually get a red badge of courage, but it's not exactly how you would think, and the way he reacts to it is not exactly how one would expect, because everybody sort of has this idea, this romantic concept of what courage really is, and yet he has the most human experience with courage in this book, and you can't help but sympathize with him, and that's what makes this book so brilliant in a lot of ways. It was actually hailed as unpatriotic, but the critics of this book at the time would say that this is like this unpatriotic book, the way he's, you know, depicting soldiers in the Civil War, and yet many of the folks who were in the Civil War hailed it as one of the most realistic depictions of Civil War out there, and that says a lot, right? I mean, how incredible is that? Now, like I said, I thought I had just read a thing of war propaganda by the end of it. Like I said, there's this kind of sunny radiance about the end of the book, and yet I don't think it's a propaganda piece at all. In fact, it's pro-human. It's exactly what a human person would do in these kind of circumstances, and I admire that a lot about this book. The themes of this book are pretty much what you would think. You know, it's courage, self-preservation, and then there's this really cool overarching theme of just how apathetic nature is to man. The how the universe doesn't care what we do. How moss will grow on the corpses of the dead, and how the sky stays blue even though the fields are running red with the blood of soldiers. It's really epic, and it's poetry. Speaking of apathy, like, there's this wonderful part in the book where you learn about the apathy between soldier and officer, how the officers view the soldiers and how the soldiers view the officers. And there's this kind of weird tug of war of apathy and anger, and it's pretty cool, and I appreciate that kind of realness as well. That's one of the things that makes this book so great, is like thoughts that I would think anybody should have, you know, and they were considered kind of sacrilegious. That was considered kind of like sacrilege to be like, I hate the officer because they are a jerk, and they're like, what? Why would you write that? I'm just like, oh, that's good. That's good. I like that. Yes. Your authority is apathetic to your life. They don't care if you die. They treat you like cattle. Yeah, you should be mad about that. And yet, all he wants to do is carry the banner and lead the charge and get his red badge of courage. It's such a nice dichotomy of the situation where he's just like, I hate these guys, but I want this so bad. I mean, it's great. It's a nice tug of war of the soul. It's solid, man. It's a solid book. It's a solid read. And I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it more after I read it. And that's one of the things that I think is very powerful about this book in particular. I read it a long time ago, like I said, when I was 6th grade maybe. So I was been like 12 years old when I read this book for the first time. And I think I remember struggling a bit with the language and not fully appreciating what I had read. So I'm really glad that I reconnected with this book. Stephen Crane is an excellent author, and I highly recommend this book. It's super short, and it makes you think, and that's what a good book does, right? On my scale of 1 to 10, if I had anything negative to say about this book, one is that there is like zero plot. And I realize this is a character-driven book, big time. Plot isn't as necessary. And I guess there kind of is a plot, but it's so predictable and tiny and loose that you're like, well, I know what's gonna happen. It's the how we get there and how Henry Fleming reacts to it is what the book is about. So I could forgive that the plot was very, very light and flimsy and pretty much non-existent. I wish there was at least one other character that I could have cared about or learned about, and I didn't get that, and that's fine as well, but, it's a short book, so it wasn't designed to have a bunch of characters in it, so I guess I could forgive that as well, but like I said, these would be like my light, problems with this book, which are just mostly me wanting more, which is also the sign of a solid book as well. I'm going to give it a 9. I'm going to give it a solid 9. And mostly it's because of the kind of wanting that I have at the end of the book. And some people might see that as a strength. Stephen Crane, The Red Badge of Courage, solid book, solid 9. I should give it a 10, but I'm just not gonna because I'm a stingy jerk. You should read this book. It's great. It's a great classic. And I'm not a big fan of war books. I'm not a big fan of military fiction in general. But this one hits all the marks, man. It's very human. And I think that's what makes this a great book. Thank you so much for watching my review of The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. This is a great American classic. If I had a top 5, this might be in my top 5 of American classical literature. Solid book, super short, worth the read. I hope you enjoyed. I know I did. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.